Hello and welcome to Out of State DMing's podcast. I'm your host, lluksblackheart. Join us as we discuss 3.5 D&D. Today we'll be finishing going over skills. Uh, Skills can be quite fun, interesting, and chock full of shenanigans. The Wow, my brain just stopped working. The main thing to remember is don't stress too much about skills and work with your DM about them. Today we'll be talking about concentration and how useful that this can be. And it is listed as the only constitution based skill that are currently listed. So when it comes to stats that affect broad spectrum of skills, constitution only hits one, and this one is important for spellcasters. So if anyone tells you that having your con as a dump stat because it's useless for you other than HP, you spellcasters out there, don't listen to them. You need hit points and you need concentration. And we'll be going over some of the reasons why here in a moment. First thing to note is that no, it's not a trained skill. No, there's no armor check penalties to it. Actions are either a free action, which pretty much is little to no effort, or it's part of another action. Which means for those who can't really tell the difference, it's excuse me. In order for certain actions to happen, you need to roll this check. That's all that really means. Some of the special things to note about it is when you cast spells, spell-like abilities, or use a skill defensively to avoid attacks of opportunity, or certain movements or anything, like loading a crossbow, normally the DC is 15 plus spell level, or using a spell-like ability, or combat casting gives you a +4 to it. You can use this to literally be adjacent to a bad guy, cast a spell at them, and as long as you're casting using the concentration skill to cast defensively, you can deny them their attack of opportunity, which is always good. Even though the DC is not low, it's 15 plus spell level, like I just said. As long as you have a decent amount in concentration, you can literally be, like I said, adjacent and cast a spell. And it can really save your life because it's used to counteract those things. A few other neat things to try to note, as my laptop wants to be cheeky with me. Why are you doing that, computer? I love technology. Note that there's a lot of information with it as it starts all the way over here. That's a lot of information. So as you can probably read, you may make a concentration check whenever you might potentially be distracted. While engaged in combat, some actions require your full attention, such as casting a spell, activating a spell, directing a spell. Just lots of spell shenanigans. Using a spell like an ability, which all normally provoke attacks of opportunity, such as disable device, heal, open lock, use rope, among several other things. In general, if an action would normally provoke attack of opportunity, you need not make a concentration check to avoid being distracted. If the concentration succeeds, you may continue with the action as normal. If the check fails, the action automatically fails and is wasted. If it it's automatically failed and wasted. If you're in the process of casting a spell, the spell is lost. If you were concentrating on an active spell, the spell ends as if you had ceased concentrating on it. Why, hello, Lavender. Thank you for joining. Yeah, there's a table below that summarizes a lot of the different DCs that you would have to make if you're trying to accomplish particular actions. And as you can somewhat see some of them here. So like for instance, if you get hit while casting a spell because you provoke attack opportunity, you have to do a concentration check or lose the spell because you just got smacked. And as you can see, what it gives for those is 10 plus damage dealt, which is for the damage during the action. The next is 10 plus half the continuous damage dealt loss, which is taking continuous damage during the action. Distracting spell save DC, which is distracted by non-damaging spells, which that depends on what the spell is being cast for the DC. Vigorous motion, violent motion, extraordinary violent motion, being entangled, grappled, or pinned. Weathers high wind carrying blinding rain or sleet. Weathers wind-driven hail. So there's a bundle of different DCs with the description of what the distraction is. Some DMs may raise those DCs or lower them. I don't recommend messing with the DCs because sometimes if you do not read what the know what the distraction falls under, you're already going to most likely be using the wrong DC anyways, because that's a mistake that a lot of DMs do have a tendency to make. And there are some DMs out there that unless it involves you casting a spell, normally they won't have you actually do any of this nonsense. And some of the DCs do have 1, 2, 3, and 4 attached to them. Not all of them, but some of them, because these are used for examples to help narrow down what it may or may not apply to. So like 1, if you are trying to cast, concentrate on, or direct a spell when the distraction occurs, add the level of the spell to the indicated DC. So for instance, if we go back up to where does it say 1 at? Because sometimes they don't like to do that. Because there's 2, there's 3, there's 4. 1 is DC, so it's so it's right there. That means if any of these trigger, you add the spell level, which can make this one here very, very, very bad for you. Because if you get hit for like 6 damage, you may not think that, oh, it's a DC 16 concentration check to get the spell off. So you may not think it's very high or very bad, but then it's like, oh, you're trying to get off a 5th level spell. Now you have to do a DC 21. So just by that, it's a little harder for you to actually kick off. And that can be applied to any of these. 2, such as during casting a spell within casting time of 1 round or more. Yeah. 3, it's from such things as Melf's Acid Arrow. Yeah, 4, and this applies to well, one's to two of them, which is distracting spells, and that's the spells allow no save. Use the save DC it would have if it did allow a saving throw. Because there's some spells out there that you don't get a save for what it does, but if it's being used to distract an individual, then the save that it would have used is what's being used for the concentration check. For instance, like some spells are just, oh, here's an direct acid attack that does just straight damage, no saves for it, but you're busy doing something that caused you to be distracted. So you take the DC that that spell normally would have, and you roll your concentration against it, even though normally it doesn't permit a saving throw. And like I said before, the actions fall under some quasi scrutiny because it's normally no actions by itself. Making a concentration check doesn't actually use up an action by itself because it's either free or being used in conjunction with another action, such as concentrating on a spell. Trying again, yes, though the success the second time does not automatically cancel the first one. So if you fail it on round 1 and you lose the spell, round 2, you can do another concentration check. But it's not going to recast that spell. That spell is lost, that spell is done, it's boom. You'd have to have something else that requires a concentration check, otherwise you're just wasting a die roll. And like it does list here for specials, you can use concentration to cast a spell-like ability, or use a skill defensively, so you can avoid attacks of opportunity. This is really, really good. Because there's certain things that you can do this with that just save you time and effort by simply making a die roll. And it has the things such as movement or loading a crossbow. Loading a crossbow does provoke attack of opportunity. If you're doing a concentration check, which it says there is a DC 15, with a plus spell levels if casting a spell or using spell-like ability defensively. So it's for loading that crossbow, it's a 15. Spells, 15 plus spell level. So if you pass that, you're like, I can reload it safely. If you fail it, people get a swing. And it also says for movement, which means people that don't want to provoke attacks of opportunity for movement can roll a concentration check, move defensively, and not provoke. Now if we scroll all the way to the top, it even says, if you succeed, you may attempt the action normally without the attack of opportunity. A successful concentration check still does not allow you to take 10 on another check if you are in a stressful situation. So, for instance, if you're trying to do the defensive loading of the crossbow, you can't take 10 on either of those things because you're doing it so you don't get swung. That's a stressful situation. It's the same thing if you're trying to do a move action equivalent, like trying to climb up a tree without provoking opportunity from the monster right there. You have to do the climb check just to see if you make it up, but the concentration check not to do it. Just because you pass the concentration check does not mean you get to take 10 on the climb check, because it's still a stressful situation. If you have the feat combat casting, that helps you cast spells with concentration if you declare you're casting it defensively. It even says you can also do it while grappling or pinned. So right there, that's a big help, especially at lower levels. Because any bonus is a good bonus, especially when it's a big bonus like a 4. And yes, a 4 is a big bonus, especially when you're playing a game where the most common bonus is normally a 2 or a 1. So 4 is a very big deal. And another thing to note with concentration, if you're trying to do it to just not get attacks of opportunity made against you, don't argue with your DM. If your DM goes, no, I'm not going to allow it, don't argue with him. Just like with a lot with some of the skills we went over last episode and further ones. If a DM says, no, I don't agree with that, so therefore I'm not enforcing that, it does not matter how much you want it enforced. The DM gets to flick it away like it wasn't there because it's DM's prerogative. It will be the same thing if the DM doesn't actually force you to make concentration checks to do certain other things outside of trying to cast a spell after getting smacked by a creature. Because when I say that concentration is one of the examples of one of the least used skills in any game I've ever ran or played, simply because no one considers it a useful skill, or they consider it a waste of points because there's no point in doing it because you're going to always fail, or you get the rare people who actually read it and go, nope, it's too much BS associated with it. Because there's an entire section for the DCs. There's 4 different things that can affect depending on what you're trying to do, and there's just a lot of shenanigans that go involved with it. Not to mention the fact that not a lot of classes get concentration as a class skill. So like some of the classes you think would benefit from it, like fighters trying not to provoke attack opportunities for moving through an area, or a rogue trying not to do it, you would think that would be really important for them. But you never see anyone doing it because, again, they either don't read the skill or have, by virtue of inheriting that behavior from past groups they've played with, consider it a useless skill, a waste of points. But it's not. If your DM will permit you to use it how it states it can be used, go with it, run with it. Don't piss them off with it, but just try to have fun with it. So I hope that was somewhat helpful with that skill. The next skill is probably going to take the rest of this episode because there's a lot of random shenanigans with this specific skill. And a lot of players don't understand the time consumption with this skill. Because it is not a simple, I just make a die roll and I succeed, now I have this. Because the skill craft has built-in restrictions. In this first section here, because it is an intelligence-based skill, it goes into the different types of crafts you could take in. Does it give some examples like carpentry, pottery, leatherworking? Goes into checks about how all of that works, and yes, bleeds into the next page there. Because there's a lot to unfold with this one. Because you can practice your trade and make a decent living, earning about half your check result in gold pieces per week of dedicated work. A lot of players will read that and assume that they just make the check and randomly have money appear in their pocket. No, because if you have no one paying you for your service or paying for your goods, you're not making money. It's a sad fact. You know how to use your tools of your trade, how to perform the craft's daily task, and how to supervise untrained helpers, and how to handle common problems. Untrained laborers and assistants earn an average about 1 silver piece per day. The basic function of the craft skill, however, is to allow you to make an item of the appropriate type. The DC depends on the complexity of the item to be crafted. Some of the DCs can be really low or really high. Your check result, the way it works is the DC depends on the complexity of the item. Yes, the DC, your check result, and the price of the item determine how long it takes you to make a particular item. A lot of people skim over that because, again, they assume that because they beat the DC, they just item. Uh, yeah. In the game world, it is the skilled level required, the time required, and the raw material required that determines an actual item's price. In some cases, the fabricate spell can be used to achieve the result of a craft check with no actual check involved. However, you may make an appropriate craft check when using this spell to make articulal requirements a high degree of craftsmanship, jewelry, swords, glass, crystals, and so forth. A successful craft check results related to wood crafting in conjunction with casting the ironwood spell enables you to make wooden items that have the strength of steel. And it goes into the spell minor creation, which may not seem like a powerful spell, but it has its own workings. All crafts require artisan's tools and give the best chance of success. If improvised tools are used, the check is made with a -2 circumstance penalty. On the other hand, masterwork artisan tools provide a +2 bonus on the check. So if you want to get progress, don't improvise tools. Don't use random things that are inappropriate for what you're trying to do. Get the artisan's kit for that skill. Then run with it, or spend the money on a masterwork because that gives you a +2. And any bonus is a good bonus. And yes, there is steps to find. Like right here, these are the four, starting 4 before we go to the next page. Step 1, you have to find the item in the equipment book or in the Dungeons Master's Guide, or if the DM set up the price for an item not otherwise described, but put the price in silver pieces, meaning you pretty much move the decimal point over 1. So if it's a 1 gold piece item, you move the decimal point over, and you have how much it is in silver pieces. And yes, that's going to become important. Find the DC from the table below or have the DM set one. I recommend using the book until you get a grasp of what things should be are for DMs. And remember, players, you cannot set your own DCs because you don't because you want something to be easier to be made. Because it's either by the book or what the DM sets. If the DM sets it, then the DM sets it. 3. Pay 1/3 of the item's price for the cost of raw materials. So the more expensive an item is, the more money you're paying for it. The cheaper it is, the cheaper you're paying for it. 4 is make the appropriate craft check representing 1 week's work. Yes, 1 week's worth of work. Because some items can take you a very, very, very long time to make it. And it's simply because it's an expensive item. While other ones, relatively short amount of time because of how cheap it is. And some of the rules here goes into how long it will take you and how to mitigate some of it. If the check succeeds, multiply your check result by the DC result times brain stopped working there. Multiply your check result by the DC. So it's result times DC equals the price of the item in silver pieces that you have completed in that time. So uh, if you manage to roll high enough to have it equal or exceed the silver price, you get it done in 1 week. If not, you have to repeat the process that next week to get to see how much more work you get. And it goes if the result X and the DC uh, equals double or triple the price of the item in silver pieces, then you have completed the task in 1/2 or 1/3 of the time. Other multipliers of the DC reduce the time in the same manner. If the result X or the result times the DC doesn't equal the price, then it represents the progress you've made this week. You record the result and make a new craft check for the next week. Each week you must make more progress until you reach the price of the item in silver pieces. So if you're trying to make an expensive item and you're not rolling too good, high enough to beat the DC but not high enough to flat out pass it, then you're going to be there for weeks. It goes into if you fail the check by 4 or less, you make no progress this week. If you fail by 5 or more, you ruin half the raw materials and have to pay half the original raw material cost again. You could try to use progress by day instead of by week. You can make the checks by the day instead of by the week. In this case, your progress check result times CC is in copper pieces instead of silver pieces. So for you guys out there trying to get it done quicker, it's not technically getting done quicker. Yes, you're making a check each day, which is 7 checks. So it may seem like it's taking a shorter amount of time, but in actuality, because you're doing because the amount you're going towards isn't in silver pieces, it's in copper pieces, it means a 1 gold piece item would normally be get a 10 or higher and you get it done. Now it's 100 because now it's in copper pieces. So something that you could normally get done relatively quickly and easily in a week because it's only a 10 you have to get to, you now have to get to 100. So you, in attempts to try to save time, you could end up not saving any time at all. Because again, you have to beat that 100 now. So unless you get really high on the check and it has a decent DC, there's a chance you're not getting to that 100 marker yet. And yes, there is rules for crafting masterwork items. You can make it a weapon, suit of armor, a shield, or a tool that conveys a bonus on its use through an exceptional craftsmanship, not being magical. It's a lot of the same things, but the masterwork component has its own price, which is 300 gold pieces for a weapon, or 150 for a suit of armor. Now, I would like you to note that that's not counting the actual cost of the armor itself. That's just for the masterwork version of it. So a weapon is 300 plus the cost of the weapon. Armor is 150 plus the cost of the armor. Once both the standard components and the masterwork components are complete, the masterwork item is finished. Note, the cost you pay for the masterwork component is 1/3 of the given amount, just as if it were costing raw materials. And it's a DC 20 to do that craft check. So regardless of how high or low the DC it is to make whatever you're trying to make masterwork, you have to beat the DC 20. And like it said, once both the standard components and the masterwork components are completed, you have a finished project. Which means you're making 2 checks, not 1. 2. So it's one of those watch what you do, because you could end up sinking money into it, and if you fail by 5 or more, you have to spend 50% of what you spent just to be able to continue any progress with it. Repairing items. Generally, you can repair an item by making the craft against the DC that it took to make the item in the first place. The cost of repairing an item is 1/5 of the item's actual cost. Because yes, your items can become broken, they can become damaged, they can be in need of maintenance. The craft skill associated with it is what you use to maintain it, and like it said, you're spending 1/5 of the item's normal cost to keep it maintained by doing this check. Yeah. And here it's a table for a lot of the generalized DCs for a lot of these different things. And you can see some of these DCs aren't very high. Like here's a 5 for very simple items like a wooden spoon. Iron pots are a 10. A high quality item like a bell is a 15. Something like a lock is normally a 20. So if a DM uses those as reference points, they can seriously either make your life really easier because you have low DCs, or a lot harder because you're trying to make something really complex or just really, really good. It also goes in examples of how certain things are done, like if you're trying to do acid, which is alchemy, DC 15. An armor or shield is 10 plus its AC bonus. So some things are real easy, like a buckler's only +1, so that's a DC 11. But if you're trying to make a suit of full plate, that's a DC 18. So there can be big leaps. Certain weapons, like longbows or short bows, is a 12. Composites are a 15. If you're trying to do a composite longbow or a composite shortbow with a high strength rating attached to it, it's a DC 15 with an additive, which is you take the 2 times it by the strength rating. So if you're trying to have a strength 1 bow, it's a +2. If you're trying to have a strength 5 bow, it's a +10. So you can seriously go from a 17 to a 25 just for trying to make that bow. And another thing to point out is a lot of these items may not seem uberly expensive or anything, but they easily can be. Martial weapons are DC 15. So a longsword, which is 15 gold pieces, easily turns into, if you're doing it by week, it's 150 silver pieces you have to make. And because it is a martial weapon, DC 15. So if you beat a DC 15, let's say you got a 16, we times that by 15, which is 240. It's not twice the amount of silver pieces, but it does succeed it. So within a week, you have a longsword. Voila. If you manage to, let's say you got a 20 instead of a 16, that's 300. Which means instead of taking a week to make the longsword, you make it in half that time. So in about 3.5 days, you now have a longsword simply because you got really, really good. Versus just beating it. Now, there's some things that you may seem, it's going to be really quick because it's 10 plus the AC rating, which, full plate, DC 18. That's your base times modifier if you succeed it, but again, you have to beat that DC. Because failing means no progress. If you fail by a certain amount, you're paying a lot. But you have to remember, full plate, its cost is 1,500 gold pieces. Which means that's 15,000 silver pieces. If you meet the just thing of getting a 19 to beat it, 19 times 18, it's only 344, 342, which may seem like a lot of progress for a lot of lower tier items. That items you may go, okay, that's easily like a week and a half worth of work for a long sword. But then you look at the fact that you need to get 15,000 because you're making full plate. My brain's doing math right now. If you repeat the rolls like that, of getting 342 as your total progress each week because you're just passing the DC, it's going to take you almost 44 weeks to complete that suit of full plate. So 44 weeks times 7 is 308 days. So just barely making the DC. Just barely making the DC. Gets you almost a year's worth of working to make that full plate. Almost a year's worth of working. That's about 60 days shy of a full year of you just making that item. And the thing you have to remember is you can't go adventuring while making these items. You can't be in the middle of the dungeon making the suit of full plate. You can't be riding your horse through the wilderness. You can't be when you're sleeping, supposed to be sleeping or resting. So you can't adventure while you're doing this. So your character is on downtime for over 300 days just to make a single suit of full plate. And that's a thing a lot of players fail to realize, a lot of players fail to see, is making some of the more important items, some of the more valuable items, some of the more really, really good items, kind of more or less can have you sitting in the background waiting for this time to pass, so that way you can now try to play catch up with the rest of the party. And because it covers so many things, weapons, armor, general equipment. And if you're lucky, you can have certain things apply to increase your DC, like Coco. And my dog's deciding to leave my room because she doesn't like me anymore. Like I said, certain things, like if you have the certain abilities that dwarves have, you can get bonuses to the checks that way. If you have the right equipment, like I said, the masterwork artisan tools. If you have the right feats, you can do it. There's like skill focus gives you +3 in that particular skill. So there's like several ways to just increase your check. Now, if you're willing to take the risk to try to decrease the time, you can voluntarily add 10 to the indicated DC to craft the item a wee bit quicker. The catch-22 is the DC is now up by 10 whole points. That may not seem like a very big thing if you compare it to, let's say, trying to make a simple wooden spoon. You can now, it's a DC 15, so if you beat the DC 15, you get more progress done that week, which means you can take a lot more progress to it. Like for instance, let's say a dagger. A dagger is a simple melee weapon, which is a DC 12. If you're willing to increase the DC by 10 to make it a DC 22, so you're almost doubling the DC, then yeah, you have the potential to get a lot more progress done, because it's a 2 gold piece item, which means you need to get a 20. Now, trying to rush something like that may not necessarily seem it, because a DC 12 times a 13 is 152. Yeah, that's almost 8 times the amount that you normally would get on it, which pretty much means the DM can permit you to pump out easily a dagger a day. Easily a dagger a day. Because that's how much time to it. It's also one of those things that I said, because that's almost 8 times the amount of time. You can just sit there and boom and work out. It's also one of those things that working by day instead of by week may seem a lot, but that dagger goes from needing 20, needing to get a total of 20, you now need a total of 200, which means the basic check, which is getting 13 over the 12, doesn't get you it done in a day. It doesn't. You would have to get higher. Like significantly higher than a DC 12. Let's say a 17. Yeah, right there. 204. 17 or higher can have you get it done in one day if you get a 17 or higher. But like it said, if you're trying to get it done as fast as possible, we can turn that 12 into a 22, which means you need to at minimum get a 23. Because again, you have to beat the DC in order to actually have the check move on. Which 22 times 23 is 506. Which means if you're doing by day progress, you're definitely getting that dagger done relatively quickly because you're over twice the 200 you did get, which means the DM can easily go, I'll permit you to take 4 hours to make that dagger. If you're doing it by week, that's 25 times it. And like it said, if you your times theirs, you get it done that much quicker. So if you beat it by 2, you cut it down in half. A third. By 3, it's a third. By 4th, it just keeps going down to easily. There's my general rule of thumb. If you manage to get the modifier high enough, an hour. Some people that some of you out there that may be actual knife smiths may go, I can have out a knife in no time. Yeah. But are you also working on the hilt? Does add time? Making one aspect of the item is a lot quicker and easier than making the entire thing. But again, I am not a professional blacksmith, nor am I a professional weaponsmith of any kind. Because I may know how to fire, heat metal, pound metal, make shape, yay. Sharpen with grinder. Now I eat meat, yay. But there is limitations on how quickly you can do things. Limitations are limitations. So by the logic here, I don't overly recommend you doing it by day because this is a clear example of, in order to have it done relatively quicker, doing this by week, making that check there, it gets it done by a factor of 25 times over the actual what you need to get. So therefore, you're making it super fast. Versus if you would do it by day, it's instead of 20, it's a 200. 506 is in the range of twice what you need to make. So it's like, okay, 4 hours. Bam. So some items, it's definitely worth just not doing the daytime. And some of the DCs are just already naturally quite high. So if you're trying to speed it up by doing that voluntary plus 10, don't. For instance, making antidotes, sun rods, tanglefoot bags, or thunderstones, which is an alchemy check, is already a DC 25. That's already a high DC. Turning it into a 35, I just don't recommend you doing, because there in amongst itself gives you more room to fail. There is rules for a try again. Does not, almost read the wrong thing. I'll try again. Yes, but each time you miss by 5 or more, you ruin half the more materials and have to pay half the original material cost. So, increasing the DC does not always directly help you, because again, failing by that 5 or more cost you more money. Having a higher DC could cost you more money, or put you in the realm of failing by 5 or more. And just add more headache to it. Actions, it says does not apply. Craft checks are made either by day or by week. So it does not matter if you want to use a move action to do it, a standard action, a free action, unless you magically, mysteriously have some weird thing. Ooh, it's either by day or by week. Either one. And unless you get into expanded rules from some of the other books, or expanded feats from some of the other source materials, you're stuck with either by day or by week. And it's, unless you roll high enough to reduce the time, that's 8 hours a day you are spending doing this check. 8 hours a day. That's why you can't go adventuring, you can't do this there, because it's not light work. Making things takes puts a certain level of mental strain and physical strain on you. Because you also need to count in 8 hours of sleep, which some would say, well, that's only 16 hours of the day. You try being in a workshop making something for 8 hours and then tell me that you have enough energy to march through the lands looking for monsters to slay. Just you also have to take into account the time it takes to set up your camp, de-set up your camp, use the bathrooms, eat your food, do any morning preps you're doing out there. So that immediately eats into a lot of what you're doing, and that's not counting any and all encounters you run into. Not to mention the fact that when the party's done traveling for the day, they set up their camp. If you're crafting throughout the night, you're not resting, which means when the party gets up to go, we're going to continue forward, you're sitting there exhausted. So it is definitely one of those things that I went to go click to check on something. I'll check that momentarily. It is one of those things that I don't recommend trying to fight, argue, or bicker about, because again, it takes 8 hours of your time. It takes concentration. You can't rush it, and it can take, for example, using the full plate as the example, it can take almost a year to make. Almost a year. And the only way to speed it up is to have a high enough ranking in it to make sure that when you take the DC and you times it by your result, you're getting an extremely high thing. So my advice for any skill check while you're trying to go into multiple or one is wait till you're high enough level to just go, oh, I now reached level 11. I have 5 skill points. I'm just going to dump them into this craft. Just keep doing that until you reach your maximum, because it is one of those skills that, again, if you fail by 5 or more, you not only make no progress, but you have to pay for more materials. If you fail by 1 to 4, you make no progress. So you don't want to get within that margin of error because, again, it can cost you money and add time. Not to mention the fact that the better you get, the less time it takes to craft, the less amount of days if you're doing it by day, the less amount of weeks if you're doing it by weeks. So if you're sitting there going, well, I'm level 15, I've mid-maxed my craft armor smithing, so now I have an 8, I have, let's say, a +3 for my intelligence, so there's a 21 right there, not counting anything else, it's a 21. So trying to make full plate with that +21, it's a lot easier. Just let's assume you got a 10. So now you got a 31. And 18 times 31 is 558. That's a lot. So if we take the normal 15,000, divide it by what you got there, 28 weeks. Well, not, sorry, 28, 27 weeks, which is drastically cheap, less time than someone doing it with just getting an 18. And again, that's only if you didn't put feats into it. That's not counting if you got the masterwork equipment that gives a +2. That's just not counting anything else. That's just a +3 intelligence and max ranks. This, if you have the appropriate crafts feat, there's another +2. If you have the masterwork tools, there's another +2. If you're you're a dwarf, there's another +2. If you have skill focus in it, there's another +3. So right there's a +9, which would turn that 21 into a 30, which means if you get an average of 40, you're making a lot more progress. And that can be technically applied to any armors. So if you're trying to get some of the easier armors, like let's say leather, which is, the padded leather, which is only a +1, with your +30, 30 from all that stuff, max skills, high intelligence, proper feats, equipment, and being the right type of entity, your average, let's say, would be a 40. That's 440 points, and padded leather is relatively cheap. It's like under 20 gold. So even if we assume it was 20 gold, that's a 200 you need to get. Just right there, you finish it in a week and a half because you are an actual skilled at it. So you're speeding up. Even if we increase the DC by 10, so we take that 11 and put it to a 21, yeah, you get more progress done, but you're also more guaranteed to pass it. And one of the rules of thumb is, because a natural 1 does not mean auto fail on a skill check, if you can get your bonus to be equal to the DC, you're golden. Because your absolute minimum is a guaranteed pass. So for instance, if you get your bonus to an 18 for armor smithing, your absolute minimum gets you your armor, gets you full progress with full plate. And because craft skill does require you to almost hyper focus, mid-max power game that skill, put a lot into it, just because you don't want to waste time. As a player, you want an adventure. You want to go into the dungeon. You want to go defeat the monster hiding in the woods. You want to explore that tower that at the top has the evil lich in it that's trying to rule the world. You want to go do that stuff. You don't want to be stuck trying to make an item for a very long time because your skill in it isn't high enough to always guarantee a pass. So you're constantly not beating the DC, therefore no progress made. You failed a few times now, you're spending more money than you originally wanted to. And because of your bonus stuff, you're just not making the progress that you feel you should be making. Simply because you did not put enough stuff into it to get there. So, besides hyper focusing in it, don't try to make anything till after level 10 if you're going to try to do it, because at that point, your maximum in just skill ranks is going to be high enough to, if not guarantee a pass, make it heavily in your favor. Not to mention the fact that by that particular point, you're going to know what particular things you're going to want to try to make your character better. Not to mention the fact that one of the more hilarious things that has consecutively always happened whenever I'm a player or a DM and someone's trying to make items is they dedicate all this effort to be good at it, all this effort to be superb. They get all this stuff done, they make the item, the party goes out, doesn't venture, beats the monster, rolls a random treasury, and voila, they have in that treasury a better version of what the party member just made. And I'm not even making that up. The amount of times I've experienced players going, I made this awesome bow, yay! They go do one adventure, and now there's a +1 bow that has flame attached to it, so whenever you shoot, you also do a die 6 of fire damage. Everyone looks at the person who just made the bow, who bragged about how awesome their bow is, even though it's just a normal bow, and go, so do you want us to keep using the bow you literally just made us spend how many weeks for you to make it on? Just for us to randomly roll a better bow? So I've literally have had that happen to fellow players I've played with, and as a DM, people spend so much time doing this just for simply the next loot they get has what they made, but better, simply because it's a magical version of it, or it's a masterwork version of it, simply because of what the party rolled. So it can get quite humorous about the amount of you just wasted a lot of your time, DM's time, everyone else's time, just for the random loot generator to mock you. Because again, that's a lot of time you spent doing that, and now you don't feel accomplished because it was simply undone relatively quickly. So to save you a lot of that hassle, to save you a lot of that heartache, unless you're setting your character up to either A, retire with still a means of decent income, or you are going to have to take a leap of absence from the game, so you want your character to still be doing something in the background to either A, help the party, or B, when you come back, you still have something, because again, each week that you are working at appropriate store doing those crafts, you make half of what your check results would be. So the better you are, the better your bonus is, the more money you can make. So if you have to take a leap of absence for, like, let's say a business trip, you have to go overseas for like 2 months, so you're going to be missing a lot of game sessions. Well, craft would be an easy way to have your character go get a job here while the party's out adventuring. So when you come back, you can verify how many weeks you were gone by, make the appropriate amount of check rolls, and now your character comes in with that amount of money to buy things to try to catch up with the party. So in retirement, or if you have to take some sort of hiatus from the game, are the only logical, effective ways to get, well, not to get, but to have those craft skills. Otherwise, again, you're trapping the character or the party, if they're your actual friends or not, to a location for a set amount of time because you want to make something. So, unless you have a very lenient DM and a party that's willing to work with you, don't go into craft. The only reason I would say that it makes sense for anyone to go into craft is if you're keeping maintenance on equipment. That's the only real logical reason outside of making things to do it. So, maintenance. Which, by the way, I will state as the ending note for today's episode, that if you're trying to use it for maintenance, do it. Just do it. If anyone says you don't have time to make something, we don't have the right stuff, you can go, oh, nope, it's so that way I can maintain our weapons, maintain our armor, maintain the group's wagon, maintain the saddle so that way they can stay in tip-top shape. Maintaining general party equipment not only makes you useful, because again, that stuff does degrade over time and can cause problems. But it also means when you get to a point where the character can retire and or you need to take a hiatus, you already right there have the means to support yourself in your absence or retiring, simply because you were maintaining the party loot. That being said, it is officially time for us to part ways. Thank you for watching. It's much appreciated. Remember to like and subscribe.